His whole life, Adrian had been taught that hard work and independence were the road to success. Contrary to his siblings, Sophia and Liam, who received trust funds and luxurious cars on silver platters by just lifting their little fingers, Adrian had to earn everything himself. His father would still say in the mansion, "Work harder, Adrian. Achieve on your own merit." And his mother, always so sleek in her designer clothes, would nod in agreement and say, "It builds character, dear." But one evening, everything changed. Passing the shut doors of his father's study, Adrian overheard a conversation that sent a chill down his spine. The voices of his parents were unequivocally tense, words such as debt and bankruptcy escaping through cracks around the gilded doors. His mother, whose voice rarely shook, whispered in panic, "What shall we do?" Adrian's father spoke with a grim resolution, "We'll figure it out, but don't tell the kids, especially Adrian." A wave of betrayal crashed over Adrian as he thought that his parents had lied to him for years by pretending a facade of riches and luxury, preaching independence to him while coddling Sophia and Liam with financial safety nets. Anger propelled him further and determination fueled him onward. If his parents actually thought they could maintain this illusion while everything crumbled beneath them, they had another thing coming. Adrian began the next day by going down to the bank his family used and greeted the manager in a very casual tone. Mr. Green had always been nice to them. "Hey, Mr. Green," Adrian said, inserting some chit-chat. "I was just wondering, anything strange happened lately with the family accounts? You know, with the market and all." Mr. Green was surprised but then fell towards him, gradually. "Adrian, I am not supposed to tell you this, but your parents have secured hefty loans and have also withdrawn hefty amounts of cash lately." This was the first crack in his otherwise faultless image so elaborately presented by his parents. Later on, Adrian overheard his mother on the phone talking to some person, energetically talking about consolidating their assets. "If this gets out, it'll ruin us," she whispered. That evening, over dinner, Sophia bragged about her latest excess balance, and Liam announced another trip overseas. Adrian bit his tongue as he watched the illusion going on, none the wiser. But he knew truth was out there, and it was just a question of time before the house of cards came tumbling down. He had grown up knowing that hard work and independence were the only ways to success, while his siblings, sophisticated and smooth Sophia and Liam, lived off their trust funds and spoiled themselves with posh cars and foreign holidays. His father would say over and over, "Work harder, Adrian. Achieve on your own merit." His mother, draped always in designer clothes, nodded her approval, "It builds character, dear." Adrian accepted his fate until the night of a crisp autumn evening, the one that would dissolve everything he knew about his family. Passing his father's study, Adrian heard hushed voices behind the closed, gilded doors. Curious, he paused just long enough to catch snippets of the conversation. Words like debt and bankruptcy sliced out, sharp and unmistakable. His mother, ever the voice of reason, shook with fear. "What are we going to do?" she asked. His father had a serious tone to his voice, quite opposite of the confident man Adrian knew. "We'll figure something out, but not a word to the kids, especially not to Adrian." Adrian's heart sank. The people he thought had everything under control were hiding something monumental. How they sustained a life of luxury, vacations, and extravagant buys, it was all an utter lie. His father, who cultivated work ethics in them, was growing Sophia and Liam with financial privileges while the family's foundation crumbled below them. Determined to get to the bottom of it, Adrian visited his family's bank the next day. The bank manager, Mr. Green, always greeted him warmly. "Hello, Mr. Green, how is everything?" Adrian asked, flashing a warm smile. "The kids must be off to college by now, right?" The small talk flowing, Adrian oozed his real question in. "By the way, is there any unusual activity upon the family accounts? You know, the way the markets have been lately." Mr. Green hesitated and looked around before leaning forward, lowering his voice. "Adrian, I really shouldn't say this, but your parents have taken out some pretty large loans and made some big withdrawals recently. His suspicions were confirmed, and later that night, he heard the sound of his mom's panicked voice raised in a heated phone call. "We need to consolidate everything. If this gets out before we're ready, it'll ruin us." Adrian sat silent at dinner that night, listening to Sophia brag about her new handbag and Liam plan another overseas vacation. The farce continued, but Adrian knew the truth, and soon everybody else would know it, too. He had been brought up all his life thinking success was something he needed to acquire, while his siblings, Sophia and Liam, lived the good life since birth. Trust funds, holidays, and expensive cars flowed their way without the batting of an eyelid. Whereas Adrian had struggled his whole life for everything, reminders from his dad only further spurred him on. "Work harder, Adrian. Success earned is success that lasts." His mom, her diamond-studded jewels reflecting along with her couture, would take it one step further and push it to the next level. "It builds character, dear." Yet that was beginning to feel like a mean joke, one built off lies. The first trace of fissures in the veneer of perfection that cloaked his family came one night when Adrian overheard a hushed conversation behind the study door of his father. Debt, loans, bankruptcy, words that shook him. His mother's voice, filled with unfamiliar panic, whispered, "What are we going to do?" His father, always composed, responded gravely, "We'll figure it out." But not a word to the kids. Especially Adrian. Adrian was hyperventilating. What was the use of keeping this from him? All his life, he worked hard and believed in merit. Now, he found out that their wealth was a lie. While Sophia and Liam were free to live life, the family's finances hung by a thread. Then it sank in, he couldn't let them get away with this facade. He had to find the truth. The following morning, Adrian headed to the family bank. He greeted the manager, Mr. Green, who had known their family for years. "Hey, Mr. Green, how's the family? Your daughter must be off to college by now, right?" he asked casually. His tone was nonchalant, light, and friendly. Mr. Green smiled affably and said, "She's doing fine, always busy with her books, you know." Adrian leaned in a bit, lowering his voice. "So, I've been meaning to ask, has there been any unusual activity on our accounts? With the way things have been lately, I wanted to check in and make sure everything's stable." Mr. Green hesitated, looking around the room before leaning in closer. "Adrian, I probably shouldn't say this, but your parents have taken out some pretty substantial loans as of late. They've also made quite large withdrawals from various accounts. Times are tough, it seems." Adrian nodded, his expression giving nothing away, but inside, his mind worked overtime. Loans, big withdrawals? It was worse than he'd thought. He thanked Mr. Green and left the bank with a growing sense of discomfort. The family fortune wasn't just shrinking, it was collapsing. Later that afternoon, Adrian heard his mother on the phone again, her voice firm and urgent. "We need to consolidate everything. If this gets out before we're ready, it will ruin us," she said, desperation slipping through her words. This wasn't the poised, graceful woman he had grown up with. It was someone on the edge, scrambling to keep up appearances. Adrian sat at the dinner table that night, surrounded by the same lavish life that now felt like an empty show. His siblings acted as if everything was normal. Sophia was bragging about the latest shopping she had done, flourishing an expensive handbag she didn't need, while Liam talked enthusiastically about another overseas vacation. Adrian bit his tongue, resisting the urge to blurt out the truth right there and then. Across the table, his parents exchanged knowing glances, keeping the charade going. The weight of betrayal pressed heavily on Adrian. His parents' everything is fine attitude fooled not only the world but even their own household. His siblings had no idea that the trust funds they relied on were close to vanishing. His parents had fought tirelessly to keep up appearances at all costs. Adrian seethed, his anger simmering just below boiling point. They had kept him in the dark because they believed he was strong enough to fend for himself. But the truth was far worse. They needed Sophia and Liam to stay oblivious. As long as his siblings kept spending and playing their roles, the illusion of wealth could continue just a little longer. He knew the truth wouldn't stay buried for much longer. It was only a matter of time before everything came crashing down. He had to act. He couldn't let them live in ignorance while the family teetered on the brink of financial ruin. But how? Should he confront them privately or expose it all at once? He sat silently at the table, his siblings laughing and chattering around him, their carefree attitudes grating against the harsh reality he now knew. For him, at least, the game was over. He had seen the truth, and there was no going back. The only question now was how and when to reveal it. It was a perfect family reunion, an ideal place for Adrian to burst the illusion so painstakingly nurtured by his parents. The large banquet hall glittered with chandeliers, echoing with laughter, clinking glasses, and politeness. People spoke to each other, complimenting others on their clothes and holidays just enjoyed, none of them suspecting that the family fortune was about to go bust. Adrian's parents pushed through the crowd, smiling, but only perfect facades hid the truth. Of course, the center of the party was Sophia and Liam, who were enjoying themselves with their usual extravagance. Sophia showed off her designer outfit and boasted about her most recent shopping spree, while Liam talked excitedly about his vacation to Europe. What the reunion really brought into his notice was how Adrian was the only one who had ever been made to struggle in his family. It churned his stomach to see his siblings living in oblivious luxury. They had no reason to think any differently. After all, the trust funds that kept them living large hemorrhaged away, drop by slow drop. Tonight, Adrian would break that mold. When it was time for the family toast, his father stood tall, raising his glass as he usually did with the same confidence Adrian had grown up seeing. To family, success, and to the legacy we keep building, his father said. The guests exploded with applause as they cheered in unison and raised their glasses simultaneously. Adrian knew this was his moment. He got to his feet, keeping his steady glass though his heart was galloping inside. To family indeed, he began, keeping his voice even. To the ties that bind us, and to the truths which define us. The guests applauded again, but his mother and father exchanged an uneasy glance. Adrian's mother looked at his father, a flash of alarm crossing her features. But Adrian wasn't through. He cleared his throat, and the room hushed. To hard truths, he said, like the fact that while some of us have been given every advantage, others are left to stand on a sinking ship. It suddenly felt like someone had cut the oxygen supply in the room, like an icy gust of wind had swept through. Sophia and Liam looked at each other witlessly as the grins on their faces were slowly erased. "What do you mean, Adrian?" Sophia asked as her fork hovered halfway up to her mouth. Adrian set the glass down on the table, his hand delving into his jacket pocket to pull out a small stack of papers. "I'm talking about the debt, Sophia. The loans. The withdrawals. All the money that's been borrowed to keep this image afloat." He passed the documents over to her, her eyes scanning the numbers, the look of disbelief spreading across her face. Liam leaned over, wanting to see the papers. "This can't be right. Our trust funds. Are they compromised?" His voice cracked as he wrestled with the thought. Adrian managed a small nod, his eyes locking with his brother's. "Yes, everything you've spent so freely? It's built on debt. It's falling apart." In an instant, Sophia's face transformed from one of shock to one of anger. "How could you sit there and watch us spend like this if you knew?" she exclaimed, her voice rising. "What kind of brother does that?" Adrian's voice remained calm, every word a bundle of frustration. "The kind of brother who wanted to wake you up, Sophia. We're all in this mess together, not because of me, but because of decisions they made. He nodded back towards their parents, now seated in frozen silence, the crack in their image of perfection finally beginning to show. Finally, their father stood up from his seat, his face crimson with rage. "Adrian, you're out of line. This is not the time or place for this." Adrian matched his father, glare for glare. "Isn't it? How long were you going to let this go on? How long were you going to just keep pretending everything was all right while our lives were being built on borrowed time?" His mother tried to intervene, her voice imploring. "We were coping, Adrian. We just needed more time." Adrian cut her off. "Time? You had all the time in the world. But no, you chose to hide the truth and let Sophia and Liam live their little lives in ignorance while everything crumbled." The room had become chaotic. Guests whispered among themselves, scandalized by the spectacle. Sophia threw the papers on the table in frustration as Liam sat back in stunned silence, trying to digest what he had just heard. His father slammed his fist on the table. "That's enough. We'll deal with this in the family, in private." Adrian shook his head. His face was fatigue-lined, but his eyes carried a steely resolve. "No. It is no longer just a family affair. It's everybody's problem now. The truth is out, and no amount of make-believe will change that." His mother looked around, her usual poise shattered. "Please, Adrian, let's talk about this later." But it was too late. The damage was done. The truth was out, and no one at the table could unhear it. The carefully crafted facade they had maintained for so long had crumbled in that instant. As the guests, showing signs of embarrassment, began to disperse and whisper among themselves, Adrian sank into a chair, worn out but relieved. An irreparable rift had been torn through the family, and he knew things would never be the same. But for the first time in years, the truth was finally in the open. And no matter how painful it was, that was a step forward. The fallout from the reunion was swift and brutal. The moment Adrian exposed the truth, the fragile unity of the family shattered. Silence filled the house in the following days, no more cheerful chatter, no more effortless smiles. Adrian had become a pariah, the one who dared to peel back the mask his parents had carefully constructed. His siblings, Sophia and Liam, who had been shielded from the truth their entire lives, now saw him as the villain. Sophia was the first to lash out. A text message from her arrived the morning after the reunion: "You destroyed this family. Don't expect us to forgive you." Adrian stared at the words on his screen, feeling the weight of her resentment hit him like a punch to the gut. The betrayal cut deep, but he knew the real wound was in her sense of loss, the trust fund she had depended on, evaporating overnight. Liam, usually more reserved, followed suit. His words were quieter but no less painful. "Why didn't you warn us? Why let us keep spending if you knew everything was falling apart?" Adrian didn't have an easy answer. How could he explain that his silence wasn't about cruelty but about waking them up before it was too late? Their parents were no better. His father barely acknowledged him, retreating into his office as if burying himself in work could somehow undo the mess. His mother tried to reach out once, but her attempt was more about damage control than apology. "We were only trying to protect you all," she said, her voice heavy with regret. But it was too little, too late. The damage was already done, and the trust between them was as hollow as their bank accounts. The house that once felt like home now felt suffocating. The tension was unbearable, every conversation strained or non-existent. Adrian decided to leave. Staying wasn't an option anymore, not with the hostility and blame weighing him down. He packed a few things, leaned on a couple of close friends, and walked away from the life he had known. There was no going back. The isolation hit hard at first. Without his family, Adrian found himself adrift, struggling to adjust to life without the wealth and status that had always been there, even if it had never been his to enjoy. The silence from his family felt like a punishment. Days turned into weeks, and not a single call or text came, not even from Liam, who he thought might have understood. But there was a strange kind of freedom in the isolation, too. For the first time, Adrian was free to build something on his own terms. Determined to turn his pain into purpose, Adrian launched a financial blog, hoping to use what he had learned from his family's collapse to help others avoid the same mistakes. His first post set the tone: managing money isn't just about having it, it's about making wise choices. To his surprise, the response was overwhelming. People were hungry for honest advice, something he wished he had gotten from his own family. Messages began pouring in from readers. "Thank you, Adrian. Your post on managing debt really helped me get back on track," one reader wrote. Others shared their own struggles with finances, and Adrian realized he wasn't alone. His blog became more than just a project, it was a community where people could be honest about their financial challenges. Still, the loneliness lingered. Sophia's angry words replayed in his mind at night, and Liam's accusations haunted him more than he cared to admit. But Adrian knew he had done the right thing. The truth, however painful, was necessary. His family had been living in a fantasy, and someone had to wake them up, even if it meant burning bridges in the process. He had made his choice, and now he had to live with the consequences. But as the blog grew, so did his confidence. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in his life, it belonged entirely to him. Leaving the family home was harder than Adrian expected. Walking away from the only life he had known, the comfort, the privilege, and even the false security, left him feeling like he was floating in a void. He carried a small suitcase, but the heavier burden was the silence from his family, especially from Sophia and Liam. The fallout from the reunion had fractured their relationships, and despite his attempts to justify his actions, Adrian knew they weren't ready to forgive him. At first, the isolation was overwhelming. Without the familiar rhythms of the mansion, the extravagant dinners, or even the sound of his father's booming voice, Adrian felt lost. Days bled into nights as he bounced between temporary accommodations, leaning on a couple of close friends who offered their spare rooms. For the first time, he was completely on his own, and it was terrifying. But Adrian had learned one thing through the chaos: he never wanted to live a lie again. Determined to turn his pain into purpose, Adrian decided to share his hard-earned lessons with the world. He began writing down everything he had learned from his family's financial collapse, how they had relied on borrowed time, hidden debt, and superficial wealth to keep up appearances. He realized that managing money wasn't just about having it, it was about making smart, intentional choices. That's when the idea for a blog was born. Sitting in a cramped apartment borrowed from a friend, Adrian launched his website. He called it Financial Compass, reflecting his goal of helping others navigate their financial journeys with honesty and clarity. His first post was straightforward: managing money isn't just about what you earn, it's about what you save, how you invest, and the choices you make. He shared bits of his own experience without revealing too much about his family's situation. The message was clear: avoid the mistakes I've seen firsthand. To his surprise, the blog quickly gained traction. People were hungry for honest, practical advice, something that cut through the noise of flashy advertisements and financial jargon. Comments began pouring in from readers who saw themselves in his words. "Thank you for this, Adrian. I've been struggling with debt, and your post made me realize I need to start facing it head-on," one reader wrote. Another asked, "How did you learn so much about financial independence?" Adrian smiled as he replied, "Life taught me the hard way." What started as a personal project grew into a thriving community. People from all walks of life, young professionals, struggling parents, retirees, came to the blog seeking guidance. They shared their own stories of financial hardship and triumph, creating a space where honesty and support thrived. For the first time in his life, Adrian felt like he belonged somewhere, not because of his last name, but because of the value he was creating. As the blog's readership grew, so did the opportunities. Adrian was invited to speak on podcasts and write guest articles for financial magazines. His voice became a trusted one in a world full of empty promises, and his message was simple: true wealth isn't about appearances, it's about making wise choices and building something real. He even started hosting webinars, diving deeper into topics like debt management, budgeting, and investment strategies. His most popular webinar, titled Truth and Finances, attracted hundreds of participants. "You can't ignore your debts forever," Adrian told his audience during one session. "The longer you pretend they don't exist, the worse they become. It's better to face the truth head-on, restructure, and move forward." The applause from the virtual crowd was real, genuine appreciation that couldn't be bought with money or status. Despite the growing success of his blog, Adrian still felt the ache of estrangement from his family. Sophia's angry message haunted him, and Liam's silence was harder to bear than any argument. He missed them more than he cared to admit, but he knew that reconciliation, if it ever came, would take time. For now, his focus was on building his own life, one grounded in truth rather than illusions. Months passed, and the blog continued to flourish. Adrian received messages from strangers who felt like friends, people who trusted him with their financial worries, knowing they wouldn't be judged. His small apartment began to feel less lonely, filled instead with purpose and the sense that he was making a real difference. Every article, every webinar, and every comment from a grateful reader was a reminder that he had chosen the right path, even if it was a lonely one. For the first time, Adrian felt at peace with the life he was creating. It wasn't easy, but it was honest, and that mattered more than anything. He had left behind a world built on false promises and unearned privilege, and in its place, he was building something real. The blog wasn't just a platform, it was a symbol of his resilience and the legacy he was creating on his own terms. And perhaps, Adrian thought, in time, his family would come around. For now, though, he was content knowing that the person he had become, strong, independent, and honest, was someone he could be proud of. Months after Adrian exposed the truth at the reunion, the inevitable happened. News of his family's bankruptcy exploded across financial headlines. "Prominent business family declares bankruptcy, assets seized," read one article. The story spread like wildfire, dragging his parents' once pristine reputation through the mud. They had been seen as pillars of the community, but now, they were symbols of mismanagement and hidden debt. Adrian sat at a small cafe, scrolling through the headlines over his morning coffee. A mix of emotions welled up inside him: vindication, sorrow, and even guilt. The wealth that once cushioned Sophia and Liam had evaporated, just like he knew it would. Their trust funds were gone, and the lifestyle they had taken for granted vanished with them. His phone buzzed incessantly with notifications, blog readers reaching out after hearing the news. One message stood out: "Saw the headlines, Adrian. How are you holding up?" Adrian typed a measured reply: "It's tough, but it reinforces what I stand for: to transparency, responsibility, and stability." Despite everything, the weight of the fallout still pressed on him. His siblings had lost not just their money but also their sense of security. Adrian knew that they blamed him, at least in part, for the way things unfolded. His parents were no longer speaking to him, and the cold silence from his family felt heavier than any public scandal. Yet, in the chaos, Adrian found peace. He had told the truth, not for revenge, but because it was necessary. And as painful as it was, he was finally free from the burden of lies. Now, the path ahead was his alone, built not on illusions, but on integrity. Adrian sat at his desk, reflecting on the journey that had brought him here. What began as a painful confrontation with his family had become a transformative chapter in his life. The fallout had been hard. He lost the trust of his siblings, the comfort of home, and the connection to his parents. Yet, through the chaos, he had built something far more valuable: a life defined by truth and integrity. His financial blog, once a small personal project, had grown into a thriving community. He wasn't just writing about money, he was helping people rebuild their lives with honesty and resilience. Every article, every message from a grateful reader, reminded Adrian of the power of transparency. Success, he had learned, wasn't measured by wealth but by the impact you make and the people you help along the way. Though the distance between him and his family remained, Adrian felt a sense of peace. The path he had chosen was difficult but necessary. He had uncovered painful truths, faced the fallout, and emerged stronger. While he wasn't sure if full reconciliation with Sophia, Liam, or his parents would ever come, he knew that his actions had been rooted in the right intentions. Adrian closed his laptop, feeling lighter than he had in a long time. The life he was building, one of independence, authenticity, and purpose, was one he could be proud of. He had let go of the expectations and illusions that once held him back. Now, the future was entirely his, shaped by the lessons he had learned and the values he stood for. True wealth, he realized, was never about what you accumulate, it was about what you stand for. And in that, Adrian had found his freedom. Adrian's journey raises a difficult question: is it right to reveal family secrets for the greater good, or should loyalty come first, no matter the cost? In exposing the truth, Adrian freed himself from a life built on deception but fractured his family in the process. Was honesty worth the pain it caused? Or should loyalty have prevailed, even if it meant living a lie? These choices force us to confront our own values. When does truth outweigh loyalty, and when does protecting loved ones become enabling their mistakes? There are no easy answers, only the consequences we must live with.